subject of the Talmud is possibly one that the best way to deal with is to jump into it. In historical times, the Talmud has been referred to as the sea of the Talmud. The best way to learn to swim is not just walking around the coast, but jumping into it. So partially what I'm doing is some kind of a little bit of a jump. The name Talmud which is later on explained, it has some other synonyms that are used sometimes in general, sometimes in particular cases. Denotes what is now a rather big book that deals, to make it formally, with the basic notions and basic ideas of Jewish oral law. Now, all this is frightening. It's even more frightening when you look at what the thing is in itself. First of all, the Talmud is a book that's very hard to explain. So hard to explain because there is not, almost to my knowledge, in the world literature, there is not a book that is exactly like that. Not just in contents, but in the way it is done, the way it is built. You can compare it partially and in some aspects to a great number of other books, but it is in so many ways sui generis. Something that cannot really be compared to other books. The main point about the book is it is mainly with exceptions, and the exceptions are not just a part of the book, but almost a building block of the book. Exceptions, variations, other forms are a part of the building of the book. But generally speaking, it's a book of discussions mostly. It's a book of dealing with material, dealing with ideas, dealing with problems. It is not so much a book that has conclusions or results, but rather discussions about subjects in its own very particular way of dealing with the subject and discussing the subject. In some way, when we say, if I would use more contemporary language, I would say the Talmud is one of the first, perhaps the first book, which is made for interactive learning. You cannot really read it passively. You will understand very little of it, and surely not enjoy any of it. To deal with it in almost in any level, from the simplest level to more advanced levels, and there are in the study of the book a great number of levels, some of them very well defined. But in order to study it, you have to interact. You are not just a passive listener, reader, viewer, but in many ways a person that gets involved in a subject. You have somehow to ask, to figure out, to try to understand things. Otherwise, it remains not only a closed book, but a text without any meaning whatsoever, as it is. So that is about. It's almost a negative description of the book. What the book is not. What it is, what it contains, can be said formally, and I mentioned it. The formal way of putting it. It deals with the Jewish oral law, just as to define what the meaning of it is. Jewish law and Judaism as a as a system, as a religion, as a culture, is based on what we call the written law. And the written law, in that meaning, which is a formal meaning, formal because all these books, speaking about books of the oral law, obviously means that the oral law at a certain time is no longer oral but written, and contains the thousands of volumes of books, which is still oral law, in contradiction to the written law. The written law is basically the Bible, to be again precise, what for many people is called the Old Testament. That is the written law. These are the sources that are the written sources, and these serve sometimes as a background, sometimes as a reference, sometimes as a springboard from which anything comes. But that is the basis from which everything else stems. Now, about the Bible in itself. It is again a book made of different parts, and the different parts, among other things, span also a fair amount of time. Say in a very rough way, if one would say, what is the span in time of the Bible? It should be that it begins at, say, generally speaking, 15th century BCE, and it goes on to the, say, about second, third century, before the Common Era. So this is the time that the book embraces. From that time, and which has, in a more precise way, there were times which are denoted within Jewish history as the Second Temple time, being roughly between the years, say, about 600 BCE to 70 after the Common Era, that the Bible was not a book to put on somebody's shelf, but a book of life. In the very, not as a flowery word, but just as a very precise form of explaining what it is. It was a book of life because it gives you instructions that people supposedly obeyed. So when it says, thou shalt, it means that you jump and do it. And if it says, thou shalt not, it means that you desist. And you may be punished harsher or less harsh for not obeying the things, which is true perhaps in a different limit about things that are not laws, but are, so to say, instructions, moral or religious instructions that still are binding and are important. Because of that comes the interest, the attempt to find out all the meanings, every meaning, as much as possible. If I'm speaking about instructions, there are instructions and instructions. If I'm dealing with a toy, the instructions are not that important. If I'm dealing, for example, with something that is, say, it's a bomb, or a car, then the instructions become very, very much important, because I have to deal with them, and I have my understanding of them becomes essential. See, if there is the instruction, there is pull lever A, and I'm not sure where lever A is, I'm sometimes in great danger, and sometimes nothing will happen. So remembering what is the meaning of each term and the interaction of those terms, that is basically what people do when they transmit knowledge, which is done any time and every time. You have written manuals about everything. These written manuals, so many times, are accompanied in real life by somebody that is teaching you, helping you to fill in the gaps between the points. So in a certain way, if one would put it, who is the first sage, as we call reverently sometimes, with those people who are the heroes of the oral law, in a strange way, but basically true. The first of the sages is Moses, because Moses has to do with his giving of a written law, has to do simultaneously also some kind of explaining what does it mean. So in that sense, he has to explain, he has to put things within any kind of a context from the very beginning, and that goes on. In fact, since those times, there is, even when there is a time in which the written law is just being written, there is an oral law that is simultaneously operating and obviously changing all the time, because the times are changing, and therefore things have to be explained in a different language, in different forms, using, of course, different comparisons and different parables. Certain things become unknown or not understood. Other things become clearer with the time, but all this changes. That was, incidentally, one of the main reasons why the oral law was kept intentionally and with even religiously as an oral law and not as a written law, up to about the end of the second, in fact, almost the beginning of the 3rd century, in the Common Era. Why? Because the oral law, as long as it is not written, as it remains something that is transmitted from one generation to another, means, therefore, that you can always adjust it to the language, to the usage, and to the problems of any particular age. When it is written down, obviously it gets involved into the same problematic as any kind of a written text, which means it needs on its own commentaries, explanations, a different level of an oral law, so to say, to explain the written oral law of the time. So that is what oral law is all about, Talmud is all about, which is I'm taking the text of the written law and somehow trying to deal with it, to make it alive. In that sense, that is so one of the keys to understand the Talmud as a book, because it has a purpose and of trying to explain in I would say in a stream, in a movement, a stable text. Therefore, the book in itself is on a move. So when it is written down, and it has been written down eventually, when it was written down, is a kind of freezing of a movement, taking a picture of a dance, freezing a river in the middle of its flow. So you have all the ripples are there, all the half tones still remain there, and that's what makes the book on one way far more fascinating. On the other way, it becomes far more easy, far more hard to get it.